Well, hello, ninth grade. Here is part two of your chapter this week, Class Amphibia. Here we are talking about a type of creature that has no scales, no claws, but to be amphibious means to have a double life or two lives. And what we're referring to here is a creature that is dependent upon water for reproduction. Now, that is a phrase that you've heard before with plants, how plants made the transition from, say, something like a fern, a pteridophyte that needed to make the transition away from needing water for reproduction, and that didn't happen until we got to the conifers. So, oddly enough, in the fossil record, you have the largest amphibians ever in existence at exactly the same time that ferns, the Carboniferous period ferns, were dominating the planet as plants. And so animals and plants run along similar tracks. Now, next chapter, when you talk about reptiles, the plants will make their transition to the conifer, the pine trees, basically, the conifer trees or conifer plants. And at the same time, you'll have animals make the transition to reptiles. And that's because the planet will cool down and dry out. So, we still have remnants of this way of life. And so, amphibians have a double life. They are literally an echo, a leftover, a remnant of a type of creature that relied upon water for reproduction, but then was able to come out onto land. And their developmental stage is exactly what you would expect of a creature that makes the transition of what we would call between fish and a land-dwelling animal. And so fishes have a wonderful fossil record. There are still lobed-finned fishes today that have the same bones that we do, of the one bone, two bones, little bones, and digits. And so there's a great fossil record in transition from fish to amphibians. Amphibians still retain the DNA code for their juvenile stage to have gills and to live an aquatic lifestyle. So I know this seems a little bit repetitive. This is a major transition here, making the claim, the case, that fish are the ancestors of all land-dwelling tetrapods, which I'll get to in a minute. And so amphibians represent that type of creature that still retain the process and the code in their DNA for their development. And so I hope that's a big deal to you when we talk about transitioning to land. You should have seen the video by now of the mud skippers, and so there are still fish that live on land. And so this is not a clean distinction between, say, water world and land world, between aquatic and terrestrial. It is actually a fuzzy line where creatures go back and forth between the two, whether we're talking about extinct organisms or modern day. And so we very easily can see the evolution of limbs, legs, and the use of that vertebra backbone for leverage now. So it is a fascinating topic of study that you could actually spend a whole month on. Now, I use the word tetrapod, and what a tetrapod technically is any animal that has limbs that end in digits extending off of the central axial skeleton. And so you are a tetrapod, a bird is a tetrapod, a ray-finned fish is not, a shark is not, a frog is. I think you're getting the idea. So anything that has a limb extending off of the central axis of the central skeleton that ends in digits. Now what you have here is a picture of an extinct tetrapod called Acanthostega, and the record for having fingers, digits, that end on the limb is 10. That would be amazing to have 10 fingers on each hand. That would make volleyball or basketball easier or more difficult. It would make that first date awkward. Maybe later in life, where do you put the ring for the wedding ring? Which finger do you put it on? It would make calculations pretty easy. And so anyway, I'm just having fun with you. But a tetrapod, the record is 10 digits. But apparently, in the history of tetrapods, it settled down to 5. 5 seemed to be the main number. Amphibians and reptiles will fuse one of those. They'll end up having 4, sometimes 3. Birds have 3 toes, 3 digits on their limbs, but they have 2 that are reduced. And so 5 seems to be the number. that all organisms settled on, and then from that they make modifications. So that's what a tetrapod is, anything that has limbs ending in digits off of the axial skeleton. So the first tetrapods that you're going to study are amphibians, and these are their general characteristics. They have thin, moist skin. That's because their skin is used primarily for gas exchange. They have lungs in the adult stage, but lungs are an accessory organ. They don't have weak lungs, they have accessory lungs. Their main respiratory organ is their skin. You're going to see some pictures today of the external anatomy of a frog, and I have a video coming for the dissection of a frog. And if you look under their skin, you'll see a massive amount of blood vessels and no fat. They are ectothermic, which means they rely on heat from outside their body to regulate their metabolism. But their skin is a respiratory organ, which is why it needs to stay moist for gas exchange to dissolve CO2 and O2, and their skin is not a barrier. Yours is, so make sure it stays that way. Their skin is not. And amphibians are one of those bioindicators of water pollution. So if you go into an area and you have lichens on the tree, that means you have good air. If you have amphibians in the water, that means you have good water. Most have 4 legs. That's what a tetrapod is, ending in digits. There's apoda who doesn't, and I'll get to that in a minute. They all rely on water not only for gas exchange but for reproduction. They undergo a massive metamorphosis, although the axolotl, the hellbender, the mud puppy, does not. It retains its gills from its juvenile stage, and we've gone from a 2 to a 3-chambered heart. So the transition in the circulatory system is pretty cool. There's your 2-chambered heart inside a fish. It's basically just a pump, and it just moves blood around in a single circuit. The 3-chambered heart takes this figure 8 circuit, and what they have there are 2 atria and a ventricle that mixes high O2 and low O2 blood. Now, that is not an inefficient heart. They need more oxygen since they live on land. Their muscles are more active to counteract gravity. But the thing is, with that 3-chambered heart, it has an incomplete septa or separation in the ventricles. Where you see 1 ventricle, we have 2 as mammals, but they only have 1. It has an incomplete wall, basically. And what they can do is close that septa, close that wall to shunt off blood going to the lungs. So they can, in effect, they can turn off their lungs. They don't need them. Why would you if you were underwater? So it's an adaptation for their lifestyle. Most reptiles will have a 3-chambered heart until you get to the big guys like alligators. They'll have a 4-chambered heart. And then everything after that, birds and mammals have 4-chambered hearts. They go through an odd process called complete metamorphosis. You heard of this with arthropods. This is not a lack of complexity or evolution. It is a niche adaptation where you keep the kids from competing with the adults for food, but they can live in the same habitat but occupy different niches. And so that's why that's there. So the first order that we come to is Anura. That's what you're going to dissect, is a frog. And just for fun, I put frog versus toad. I hope that you've read Frog and Toad as a kid, but here you can see the difference between the two. They're both amphibians, but one prefers a more terrestrial lifestyle and only returns to water to lay its eggs, whereas the other, the frog, lives in a semi-aquatic lifestyle. But both have all the same typical adaptations that you would expect of an amphibian. The question to you is, why isn't an alligator or a sea turtle an amphibian? The answer should be is they don't rely on water for gas exchange or for reproduction. They live in the water. Dolphins live in the water, but they're mammals. By the way, I graded your fish quizzes. Dolphins and whales are not fish. They're mammals. So just living in the water doesn't mean you're an amphibian. An amphibian relies on water for reproduction and for gas exchange. Then there's Caudata, the salamanders, the newts. There's your axolotl, the hellbender. And so these are not lizards, but they do have a lizard-like body. They move, they alternate their spine with their limbs to move like a lizard, but they have no scales and no claws, and they do go through metamorphosis. but here's another amphibian. And so what I'm trying to transition you from is a fish to a reptile, and we're just making this transition by using modern day creatures to tell the story. They all arose somewhere, and we're looking at the ends of the branches, if you will. The last one is Apoda, no feet, Sicilians. That's not an Italian kid. A Sicilian is basically a legless amphibian, goes after kind of grubs and earthworms, and so here you can see a more complex picture of one. They're really odd, not often seen. They have a nice skull cap, an ossified skull with teeth. So they are everything that we would expect of a tetrapod. Their legs are extremely reduced, no vestigial limbs left over. Their evolution is so complete. But they're not a snake and they're not a worm. They're an amphibian. And so this is an example of convergence where you see different lines landing in the same body plan. So these are your amphibians, and they make this nice transition for us from a completely aquatic lifestyle to a terrestrial lifestyle. And so voila. Now from here on out, we're out of the water, and we're going to talk about completely terrestrial creatures. What's coming up will be a video of a frog dissection. And so not this picture, but the following ones are actual pictures from students dissecting in Founder's Lab. I won't show you any guts here, just external anatomy, but this is what you were supposed to handle. I think actually this is the leopard frog that y'all dealt with in middle school, and what you get in high school was the giant American bullfrog. It's pretty big. And so you're looking at the tympanic membrane. They make noise, and creatures that make noise can hear noise. And so that's basically an eardrum, an amp, a woofer, right? And so it amplifies their noise and it picks up on sound as well. And then you'd move to the mouth where you can see their maxillary teeth and their nares for their nostrils, and that's their tongue that's on the very edge there in the front. And so I won't go inside the mouth to show you the body yet. I'll upload a video for you all to see. So there's your amphibians, gang. Enjoy.